The Dragon Prince Season 6 is almost here, and with that in mind, I wanted to talk about some of the character arcs we've already gotten to see reach fruition. The Dragon Prince is set up so that there's 3 seasons before a time skip, and then the current seasons which are taking place after the time skip. I want to focus in this video on the arcs of some of our villainous characters pre-time skip. That means Soren, Viren, and Aaravos all get a deep dive in this video. Spoilers for the Dragon Prince seasons 1 through 3. Let's get right to it. Sup peoples, and welcome back to another video. Now, if you've been on this channel before, you've probably heard me talk about Soren before at least, but I actually love pretty much all the villains from this show, and that's why with the new season coming out, I'm so excited to watch it, and I really want to do a deep dive into what we can learn from these characters as writers. Before I talk about any other character from this show, I have to talk about my fave, Soren. Soren has a redemption arc, and it's a really interesting character arc in my opinion, more so than others that I've seen, because it's almost like 2 character arcs fighting for dominance in the beginning. Soren's character arc, part 1, the descent. The first part of Soren's redemption arc is his descent towards evil. While a bit of a bully at times, Soren isn't a bad person when we first meet him. So before he can be redeemed, he needs to be corrupted. That's part of what makes his arc so interesting. It's a full roller coaster with him going from hero to villain, and then back to hero again. So the moment when Soren's corruption arc begins is when his father instructs him to kill the princes, Ezran and Callum, and despite Soren's better judgment and morals, he agrees. Why I think this is worth noting is the fact that he doesn't just have a redemption arc the way that other characters do, because he doesn't start the story as a villain. He actually starts the story as a hero, trying to protect Harrow, training with Callum, and even if he teases some of our main characters, he still seems to be a fairly good guy and a friend of our protagonists. That's why calling his arc just a redemption arc, I feel like doesn't sum it all up, because it's more like we're watching him fight with himself. There's 2 arcs almost happening at the same time. You have his corruption arc, which is what his father wants him to do, and he keeps leaning towards that. But then you also have the redemption arc, which is actually just what he actually wants, and the person he was at the beginning of the show, trying to fight off the corruption arc. Soren's arc, part 2, questioning. Soren's arc is interesting because it's a redemption arc and a corruption arc playing out at the same time. He's doing villainous things, so he needs to be redeemed. But his heart isn't in it, so he still needs further corruption before he can be truly called a villain. This is shown in several instances during the show. For example, the first confrontation is when Soren has a chance to kill Ezran. To even attempt this, he has to make an excuse of having it as an accident, but he does still go through with the attempt. This shows the corruption arc beating out the redemption arc for the time being. The second confrontation takes place when Soren is injured by the dragon in Season 2. Upon discovering that he's been paralyzed and cannot move, he says it's for the best, because this way he can't do anything terrible. His redemption arc is winning this battle. But after he's healed, he still returns to his villainous father alongside Claudia. The corruption arc still has its claws in him. The third confrontation is when Soren tries to tell Claudia about their father's plan, but Viren makes excuses and insults his son's intelligence rather than owning up to his actions. In this moment, Soren has shown that even though he nearly died trying to complete his father's mission, it doesn't matter. It will never be enough, and he will never be what Viren wanted in a son. The redemption arc wins out against his corruption arc, and he begins his full redemption. A very convenient thing about this show is the fact that there's 3 seasons that I'm talking about right now before the time skip. And there's sort of like each part of an arc in each season, which I think is a good move on the writer's part. It means that you know exactly what your goal is with each season. I think that that sort of structure can really help you with planning, and it's why these arcs feel so seamless and thought out, and they really hit. With Soren, the first season is about the corruption arc winning. The second season is about the redemption arc winning. And the third season is about him beginning his redemption arc. It's not exactly that cut and dry, but those are sort of the steps that are taken. Now, for the third part of his arc, this is where the redemption-y part really starts taking full effect. Soren's arc, part 3, Redemption over Corruption. The moment when Soren's redemption arc really begins is when he chooses to free Ezran and betray his father. He tells Ezran that his loyalty is to the king, and begins his final character arc. The reason that I say he begins his arc, and not that it's reached its end, is that despite saving Ezran, he does remain by Viren's side for most of the 3rd season. He faces Viren's lies, but now with opened eyes, able to see them for what they are. And then the second turning point takes place. When Viren wants to transform his army with magic, they are understandably wary, and so he offers to transform his own son first. Soren is afraid, and rightfully so. Viren gives the power to another, more willing member of his army, and proves in that moment that he would have gladly robbed his son of his humanity with this dark magic. Soren is horrified, and decides that this is the last straw, and tries to leave, but Claudia stops him. But, whereas before he would have returned to Viren's side with her, he now completes his character arc and stands firm, even if that means leaving his sister behind as well. His new loyalties are then cemented when he joins the protagonist and fights against his father. Soren's redemption arc is about realizing his self-worth, that he can make decisions for himself, that he doesn't have to be like his father, and that nothing will ever be enough for his father. It's actually pretty sad to see the way that Viren treats him, and the way that he keeps trying to prove himself to him. It's sort of a sad character arc, because it doesn't end with a great victory of him happy. It ends with him having to leave Claudia behind. The one person who all 3 seasons he's shown to have a healthy relationship with, and he's shown to really care about. But he tries to be the bigger person, and he doesn't make her choose between him and Viren. He makes the choice for her, and he lets her stay by their father's side, which is so sad. Anyway, why I think that Soren's character arc is a good example of something that we can learn from as writers is that, like I said before, it's not just one character arc. It's sort of mixing these tropes and archetypes and arcs and playing with them. How can I have a redemption arc and a corruption arc at the same time? And if that's possible, like it is with Soren, then what other arcs could we mix? That creates something really interesting, because it means that while archetypical arcs like the growth arc, the redemption arc, the disillusionment arc, etc., which I talk about in the video I will link up above, are still valid and they're still great. Like, those are some great arcs. I don't think they'll ever get old. Don't feel like you can't use them. But it does mean now that if you wanted to play around with something different or more unique, you totally could. You could combine things. I talk about this a little bit in my What Writers Can Learn from the Bad Batch video, which I will also link up above, though that's not about character arcs, it's about character archetypes. So like the smart one or the goofy one, and how you can combine those to sort of subvert expectations. I really liked that Soren's arc managed to subvert expectations a little bit, because we're shown a character that we think is going to get a corruption arc, but they combine it with a redemption arc. And that means that you can create something really interesting and new out of previous hallmarks of storytelling. I think that another thing is that Soren and a lot of the other villains in the Dragon Prince are actually sympathetic. And this is shown through their relationships. A lot of times we have villains have unhealthy relationships with other characters because they're bad and they're toxic. And while I think that that's very compelling and interesting, and I like those relationships in fantasy stories where they're not real, it's good to remember that a healthy relationship can make your character more sympathetic. Seeing Soren and Claudia's relationship makes us like them automatically, because they're such supportive and good siblings, even if they are trying to do really bad things. Seeing Soren doing these bad things to try and make his father proud of him makes us sympathize with him, not hate him. Whereas if he was doing these bad things just because he could, I doubt we'd find him a sympathetic character at all. And even with characters that don't necessarily get a redemption arc, like Viren, who I'll be talking about next. But this just ties in with the same thing. Viren's relationship with Claudia makes him sympathetic, whereas Viren's relationship with Soren makes him seem villainous. And we can play around with these things. Basically, it's all about combining different elements. Your character can have 2 character arcs. They can have 2 types of relationships with people. They can be complicated and messy. And especially with villains, I think that makes them all the more compelling. Now, I've talked about Soren, which means we have to talk about Viren. I would say that Viren is probably one of my favorite villains we've gotten on screen recently. I think that he's such a good villain. and it was actually really hard to break down why, but I did my best in this next section. So let's talk about why Viren is such a good villain. Now, Viren has a corruption arc, and I would say that at the heart of it is how far is too far. He's the kind of character who starts out as sort of maybe a hero, but in sort of a gray territory, and then steadily progresses further and further into evil. Viren's character arc, part 1, whatever it takes. To truly understand Viren's corruption arc, we need to start at the beginning. The beginning. Harrow never treated Viren as a king would treat a servant. Instead, he treated him as an equal. This meant a lot to the mage, and the two were very close. I do believe that while Viren might have had more villainous tendencies than other characters in the show, he was a hero at some point. And that's part of what makes him so compelling. He's willing to do anything for humanity, even if that means destroying it in the process. He believes that nobody else is able to see things as clearly as he can, or do what needs to be done. That he has to do terrible things because he's the only one strong enough to do them. He's lying to himself. And we have to think, when do these terrible things make you the monster, even if you do have good intentions? I'd say once you order the death of children, that sort of makes you the bad guy, but hey, that's just my opinion. There are a lot of possible options for when Viren's corruption arc may have truly begun. Did it start when he healed a child Soren by using dark magic? Did it start when Queen Sarai died so that he could live? Did it start when Harrow looked down on him in his final moments? We might never know, but what we do know is that he was a different person once. He loved his son, and he was willing to die for his king. But that person is gone, though signs of him do show through every once in a while, like in his love for Claudia. Why I think that this is important to remember, that the beginning of Viren's character arc is not actually the first season of the show. It's far back in the flashbacks, and before we actually meet the character, is because he's sort of like a Saw Gerrera type. If you're a Star Wars fan, you probably know what I mean by that, but if you're not, I'll explain it. And don't worry, that we find one Star Wars reference for this video. Saw Gerrera is an interesting character because he's a rebel fighting against the tyrannical empire, but to beat the empire, he becomes like them. He uses methods that are looked down upon by the other rebels, and he's not above hurting people just to get what he wants. Sure, his motives are good, but the lengths he'll go to achieve them are bad. So then you have to ask yourself, is he a hero or a villain? And that's what makes him really interesting. And I think that Viren is similar to that. He's not the good guy, but you can understand where he's coming from. I mean, more so in certain aspects. When you order Ezran and Callum killed, there's not really a good reason for that. But when we first meet him, we get bad vibes, but I feel like we do sympathize with him a little bit. Especially one of the moments that struck me was when Viren went to go and speak to Harrow for the final time. He was probably actually about to say, I will swap places with you, and I will die so that you can live. That was my take on it. That was how I read that scene. But Harrow just sees dark magic as the thing that got us into this mess. Which, I mean, he's not wrong. But I think that it's important to remember that Viren is trying to do the right thing. It's just that what he thinks is the right thing isn't necessarily the right thing, and his methods are a lot of times definitely not the right thing. And the more that the season goes on, and the more the show goes on, the worse and worse it becomes. He starts out far in the past as a heroic character, but the more that his story goes on, the worse he becomes. But he still thinks of himself as an original heroic character. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and anything can be excused in his mind. Viren's arc part 2. However dangerous. Even though Harrow doesn't want to start a war, Viren pushes him to want revenge for Sarai's death. Harrow, given permission to feel this rage and think these dark thoughts, agrees to kill the Dragon King. But it seems like this action had an effect on Harrow and Viren's relationship afterwards. Harrow regrets what he did, especially the supposed destruction of the egg, and accepts his fate when he hears of the Moonshadow Elves' oncoming assassination attempt. But Viren doesn't think that they were in the wrong, and so we return to his mantra, that he'll do whatever it takes, no matter how dangerous, no matter how vile. He's willing to do what needs to be done, unlike everyone else. These beliefs are the lie that tempt him closer and closer to evil. Like I said in the last bit, Viren thinks that he's in the right. He's doing what it takes to protect humanity. He's not bad, he's stronger than everyone else. He's willing to sacrifice himself and his own goodness to do what needs to be done. Harrow isn't doing the right thing necessarily, but he feels remorse. Viren doesn't let himself feel that remorse. Instead, when that emotion crops up, he justifies his mistakes. And a lot of the things that happen in The Dragon Prince are actually just Viren trying to cover up the mess he's made. Viren's Arc, Part 3. However vile. Viren, always in the name of the greater good, takes the throne for himself after Harrow's death. But to make it official, the princes have to be out of the picture. And so he orders his own children to kill them secretly, and to make it look like an accident. Meanwhile, his villainous actions are being supported and egged on by Aaravos, who has finally found the perfect pawn. I think that a big part of Viren's arc is his hubris. He thinks that he's the only one capable of saving humanity, that he's the only one willing to do what needs to be done. He's a good villain because he can spin everything to his own narrative. Every evil thing he does, he finds a way to justify to himself. And the more he justifies, the more messes he has to cover up, and the more villainous acts he commits. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Viren doesn't think that what he's doing is wrong. He doesn't think that he's in the wrong. He will acknowledge that there are some messes he's made, but he'll just clean them up. But in the act of trying to clean them up, he creates more messes, which he then has to clean up, and he ends up digging his own grave. And the deeper that he digs, the more cruel and evil his actions have to become to cover up what he's already done. It's like everything that he covers up, he has to make an even bigger mistake to cover it up. So what can we learn from this as writers? This tells me that motivation is crucial. If you can figure out the core beliefs of your character, then you can figure out how they'll react to every situation. Just like when Viren kills Avizandum and discovers that there is an egg, we can look back to his motivation and his beliefs and understand why he'd go, I'm the only one who can clean up this mess. I'm going to go and destroy the egg. Another thing that I liked about Viren as a villain is that he still thinks he's the hero. And that's something that I've always found compelling. When villains either feel like they were once heroes, or feel like they still might be heroes, or just basically when a character isn't just evil, or they don't see themselves as just evil at least. They are complicated and sort of messy, and maybe their view of themselves does not align with what they're actually like at all. Now, that isn't to say that evil for the sake of evil villains aren't cool. I actually talk about that in the next segment with Aaravos. In my mind, there's something really compelling about a hero who went too far, or a villain who could be mistaken for a hero in another light. Viren is pretty obviously the villain to outside viewers, but in his own mind, he's still the hero. And another thing to remember is that a villain can make mistakes and still be intimidating. Like with Viren, sometimes their worst deeds might come out of trying to cover up that mistake. The more villainous acts that he commits, the more he has to excuse them to himself, and the more villainous acts he commits. In this way, the writers of The Dragon Prince are able to show him steadily getting crueler and crueler as the seasons progress. Because the more villainous things he does, the more he can excuse doing more of them. So what that means to me is that remember that your villain isn't a static character. Maybe they did already complete a corruption arc and that's their backstory. Or maybe they're just starting out on one. But whatever the case, they can still grow and evolve over the course of the story. They might even start in the same place as your hero, just with a negative arc instead of a positive one. After talking that much about villain motivation and needing to know backstory and all of this, how about we talk about something I don't cover much on my channel? Evil for the sake of being evil. I do not think that your villains have to have a super complicated backstory or seem like a hero in a certain light or anything like that to be cool. They're my favorite personal type of villain, but I've gotten a lot of comments saying that villains can also just be evil. And I totally agree with that. And that's why I wanted to focus in on Aaravos this time. So welcome to the third and final section of this video. Aaravos. Evil for the sake of being evil. Since Aaravos doesn't really have a character arc to break down, I just wanted to talk about why is evil for the sake of being evil compelling? And why is Aaravos so good at it? Caveat here that I'm only talking about the first 3 seasons for this video because I want to talk about the later seasons after the time skip once those have wrapped up and I can look at them all cohesively. So it is totally possible that maybe Aaravos gets a crazy backstory and tons of lore and like a character arc and all of that stuff. But He gives me evil for the sake of being evil kind of vibes, and I just wanted to talk about him the way that he appears to us in the first 3 seasons. First off, Aaravos' motives and goals are unknown to us in the beginning. He's the mystery man in the mirror. And I think that that's part of what works really well about him, because it makes him even scarier and more interesting. Humans are afraid of things that they don't know or understand. We aren't afraid of the dark because it's inherently scary. We're afraid of it because we can't see what's out there. Another thing to keep in mind about what makes Aaravos such an intimidating villain is the fact that Viren is already a scary villain on his own. So knowing that Aaravos is manipulating him makes him even more intimidating. If he's manipulating the manipulator, what else could he be capable of? It's all of these mysteries that make Aaravos so compelling. And I think that this works really well for him. I mean, it's called The Mystery of Aaravos. But it doesn't have to work on the mystery character only. It can work on all villains that are evil for the sake of being evil. And I plan to talk about this more on my channel in the future. Now, with Aaravos, what I think we can learn from his whole Man of Mysteries act is this fear of the unknown. One of the things that's so compelling about evil for the sake of being evil characters in my mind is that we don't really know what they're doing. If we have a character like Viren, and we know his mantra, and we know his motives, and we know his backstory, we have a basic understanding of him and his goals and what he wants to do. But with Aaravos, we really don't know much at all. We know that he's scary, we know that he's powerful, we know that he is capable of manipulating our scariest villain. So what does that mean? What does he want? It's all of these unknowns that make us want to learn more so much, and that make him so scary. It's because not knowing makes something scarier. It's the reason that the horror movie is its most frightening before the monster is revealed. Humans are naturally scared of the unknown. So the more unknowns that your villains and your story can have, the more suspenseful and the more scary it will be to your readers. Now, when I say scary in this context, I don't mean jump scare scary. I mean like your readers are intimidated by your villain kind of scary. I hope that this video helped. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on all of these characters. I love getting to look over your character analyses and read them, and I also love to hear your thoughts on if maybe I misread something or I forgot a certain scene or whatever the case. So let me know all your Dragon Prince thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next week for the next video where I'm going to be talking about the good old Rayla and Callum from seasons 1 through 3. I'm so excited for this new season. I'm so excited. I cannot wait for it to come out. I think it's coming out pretty soon around the time that I'm releasing these videos. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you on the next page. Till then.